By whatever measure you use, box office, strike rate, awards, George Miller is Australia's most bankable film director. And now the Oscar winner is back where it all started, with Mad Max. The 1979 original, that made Mel Gibson, of course, was the start of a stellar career for George Miller. Any director would be lucky to have one franchise as successful as Mad Max. Miller also created Babe and Happy Feet. Now he's decided the time's right for another instalment of Mad Max, Fury Road, a reboot of the original with all the special effects and polish that a $150 million budget can provide. I met George Miller at his Sydney office. George Miller, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
How does this new Mad Max film relate to the previous Mad Max instalments, particularly the original shot in 1979?
Well, I like to call it revisiting the world. It's not chronologically exact. That was made over 35 years ago. This one's set about 45 to 50 years from next Wednesday, when all the bad things we read in the news happen all at once, and we end up in some sort of apocalypse.
You mentioned it was 35 years ago. Does it feel like 35 years ago?
It's strange, you know, you always wonder as you age, you wonder where the time goes. It happens to all of us. But I had, in South by Southwest, a festival in Austin, Texas, a couple of weeks ago. They showed a brand new print of Mad Max 2. And it's the first time I'd seen the film for 32 years with an audience. I was really surprised how affected I was.
This is Mad Max 2.
Seeing Mel as a 24-year-old and looking so fine and doing that work.
Did you contemplate having a cameo role in this film for him?
Well, I didn't for Mel, because it would have been too dissonant. I mean, we're trying to invite an audience into the world and believe it, and you have this Tom Hardy playing Mad Max, and then suddenly, if you see someone as Mel Gibson, you're suddenly pulled out of the movie.
As the world fell, each of us in our own way was broken.
The look of this new film was so amazing, and it's so striking in the way that it's shot. How did you conceptualise all of that visually?
Well, the first thing is, after the initial Mad Max, there have been a lot of movies, a lot of video games, a lot of manga comics, a lot of anime working in this area, and almost all of them desaturate the film, so it looks very, very bleak. And I realised if we did that, we'd be sort of almost falling into cliche all this time later. So one of the things we realised that we actually cranked up the colours. The other thing is that people tend to design these things as a kind of junkyard. But we had a mantra, which was, just because it's the apocalypse, it doesn't mean that people can't create beautiful things.
Did you have any sense at the time when you were making the original that it was something culturally significant? Because very quickly it became, I guess, a touchstone of Australian, not just cinema culture, but just Australian arts and culture generally. Was there any sense of that at the time?
No, you're just making the film, and at the time when I was lucky, I felt lucky that it was released, let alone had a resonance. We put a lot of work into it. It was very low budget. I'd never really been on a film set before, so and we put it out there, and it was only later. It's only later that the audiences really tell you what your film is.
So how old were you when Mad Max came out in 1979?
34.
So you're 34, you've made this low-budget film. As you say, you haven't been on a film set really even before, and then it comes out and it's this absolutely monster international hit. I mean, what was that like?
Well, I didn't get too carried away, because I had to spend a year cutting the film. We ran out of money. And for 1 year, I was confronted with all my mistakes. And so, and really that taught me a hell of a lot. So when it did come out, I just sort of thanked the movie gods and said, okay, next time I'm not going to make the same mistakes. And of course, I always make the same mistakes or new ones, and you keep doing it until...
So is that still your experience, even when you're cutting something like Fury Road now, that you still look and
shockingly,
think,
yeah, it still happens. It still happens. You say, who was that fool director who did that? Why did he do that? But that's what you do. You can never, cinema, I doubt there's much in life you can master, but cinema is certainly one of those that no one will ever master. It's too comprehensive in its skill set. It's vision, it's sound, it's music, it's spoken word, written word, it's colour, it's composition. It encompasses so many of the arts.
are you in a position in your career where whatever you want to do, it's a green light because you're you?
People say that that's the case, but for me, making movies is not. I still don't see it as a career. I somewhere in the back of my mind, I feel I'm still a doctor because I never. When we started making movies back in the 70s, it wasn't a proper career.
You studied medicine when you were a young man and you worked for a while at St Vincent's Hospital. Do you ever think back to, that fork, I guess, where you were in your life, early in your life, and how different things... I could be interviewing you down at St Vincent's about Saturday night in the emergency room.
Well, I sort of think about it a lot because I have a twin brother, John, who's a doctor. We went through medical school together and our paths were quite divergent. But it was never a fork in the road for me. It was a slow dissolve. It was never like a decision, do I go this way or that way? John Lennon said it best when he said, life is what happens when you're making other plans. And I think that's true of everything.
Do you think for kids these days who want a career in creative arts that they need a fallback option?
I think definitely. Two reasons why you need a fallback option. It's changing so rapidly. You have to be very agile and very adaptive. That's number one. Number two, the more multi-skilled you are, the more, if you master one area, it really informs you in another area. People say, well, what's a doctor, what got to do with making movies? For me, it's got everything to do with making movies. Problem solving. I've spent my whole life observing other human beings, sometimes really intimately. And filmmaking is all about perspective shifts and so on. So,
well, and a body tells a story in a micro way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And even literally in a micro way, you can look at the cells of a person. So so all of that certainly informed the way I try to make movies and try to solve problems in movies. That's the creative life is an unpredictable one, but it's really important to have a fallback, not just for safety, but to broaden your bandwidth and broaden your perspective.
George, it's been so fun to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.